The flour dust hung in the morning air like a sweet fog when Grayson Cooper first saw her through the bakery window. And in that single moment, watching her hands move with practiced grace over the dough, he knew his life would never be the same. The year was 1876, and Colfax, New Mexico Territory, was a rough collection of weathered buildings clinging to survival along the Santa Fe Trail. The town had seen better days, back when the railway construction brought hope and commerce, but now it survived on cattle drives and the occasional wagon train passing through. Most businesses struggled to keep their doors open, but Olivia Kensington's bakery stood as a beacon of warmth and civilization in an otherwise harsh landscape. Grayson had ridden into town that September morning with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and 3 months' wages from a cattle drive that had taken him from Texas to Colorado and back again. He was 24 years old, lean and weathered from years of hard work under an unforgiving sun. His plan had been simple: rest for a day or two, resupply, and move on to the next job. He had not planned on her. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as he pushed it open, and the scent that greeted him was unlike anything he had experienced in months of trail dust and campfire smoke. Fresh bread, cinnamon, sugar, and something else, something that spoke of home and comfort and all the things he had never really known. She looked up from behind the counter, and Grayson felt his breath catch. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pinned back in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped to frame her face. Her eyes were a striking green, intelligent and guarded, and there was a sadness in them that made him want to know her story. She wore a simple dress covered by a flour-dusted apron, and her hands, he noticed, were strong and capable. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and pleasant despite the wariness in her expression. "What can I get for you?" Grayson removed his hat, suddenly aware of how trail-worn he must look. "Morning, madam. I was hoping for some breakfast. Whatever you recommend." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "The apple pie is fresh from the oven. I also have biscuits with honey butter or sweet rolls if you prefer." "The pie sounds perfect," he said, though in truth he would have ordered anything just to have a reason to stay a few minutes longer. She moved with efficiency, cutting a generous slice and placing it on a simple ceramic plate. Her movements were graceful, practiced, and he found himself transfixed by the simple domesticity of it all. When she set the plate on the counter, their fingers nearly touched as he reached for it, and he saw a faint blush color her cheeks before she quickly stepped back. "That will be 15 cents, she said. He paid and took a seat at one of the 3 small tables near the window. The first bite of pie was a revelation. The crust was perfectly flaky, the apples tender and spiced with cinnamon and just a hint of nutmeg. It was the kind of food that spoke of care and skill and pride in one's work. "This is the best pie I have ever tasted," he said, and meant it. She looked up from where she was kneading dough, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. "Thank you. That is kind of you to say." "I mean it truly, madam. I have eaten in cattle camps and trail stops from Texas to Montana, and nothing compares to this." The pleasure in her expression faded slightly, replaced by that guarded look again. "Well, I hope you enjoy it." He wanted to say more, to keep the conversation going, but something in her demeanor told him to take his time. He finished his pie slowly, savoring every bite, and when he left, he tipped his hat to her. "Much obliged, madam. I expect I will be back." "We open at 6 every morning," she said, and he thought he detected the faintest hint of warmth in her voice. Grayson had intended to move on within a day or two, but as he settled his horse at the livery stable and secured a room at the modest boarding house on the edge of town, he found himself reconsidering. There was work to be had at one of the local ranches, the livery owner mentioned. The foreman was looking for experienced hands, and the pay was decent. Before Grayson quite realized what he was doing, he had agreed to ride out the next morning to inquire about the position. That evening, he learned more about Olivia Kensington from the boarding house owner, a talkative woman named Mrs. Shaw, who seemed to know everything about everyone in Colfax. "Such a sad story, that one," Mrs. Shaw said as she served Grayson a modest supper of stew and cornbread. "She came here 3 years ago with her husband, Thomas Kensington. He was a dreamer, that one, full of big plans. They opened the bakery together, and for a while things seemed to be going well. Then he took sick with pneumonia the winter of '74, gone within a week, poor soul. Left her with nothing but the bakery and a mountain of debt." "That is a hard thing," Grayson said quietly. "It is indeed. Most women would have given up, gone back to family, or remarried quickly, but not Olivia. She worked herself near to death to keep that bakery running and pay off what Thomas owed. Took her nearly 2 years, but she did it. Now she owns that building free and clear, but she is still just scraping by. This town is too small to support much business, and most folks do their own baking." "Yet she stays," Grayson observed. "She does. I think she feels it is all she has left of him, in a way, a monument to what they tried to build together." Mrs. Shaw shook her head. "She is only 23 years old and already a widow. It is not right. She should be courted and cared for, not working her fingers to the bone every day before dawn." That night, lying in his narrow bed listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling for the night, Grayson thought about Olivia Kensington. He thought about the sadness in her eyes, the strength in her hands, and the way she had looked when he complimented her pie. He thought about how she had built something good and lasting in a place where most things were temporary and rough. And he thought about how, for the first time in his rootless life, he wanted to stay somewhere. The next morning he was at the bakery when she unlocked the door at 6 o'clock. She looked surprised to see him standing there, hat in hand. "You are an early riser," she said, pulling the door open. "Cowboy habits die hard," he replied. "I was hoping for another slice of that apple pie if you have any left." "I made a fresh one this morning," she said, and this time her smile was a bit wider, along with peach and cherry. "Then I will try the peach today," he said. "Got to work my way through your menu." As she prepared his order, he found his courage. "My name is Grayson Cooper, by the way. I should have introduced myself properly yesterday." "Olivia Kensington," she replied, though he already knew. "Welcome to Colfax, Mr. Cooper. Just Grayson, please." "I am not much for formalities." She set the pie before him. "Then you may call me Olivia if you wish." It was a small thing, the exchanging of given names, but it felt significant. He ate his pie slowly again, and they talked in the quiet morning hours before other customers arrived. She asked about his work, and he told her about the cattle drives, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, about crossing rivers and facing down storms and the simple satisfaction of honest work. "It sounds like a hard life," she observed, refilling his coffee without being asked. "It is, but it has its rewards. There is freedom in it, in being able to move on whenever you want, to see new places." He paused, then added quietly, "Though lately I have been thinking that maybe there is something to be said for staying put too." Their eyes met, and he saw color rise in her cheeks again before she turned away to tend to her ovens. True to his word, Grayson secured the ranch job that afternoon. The foreman, a gruff man named Dalton, hired him on the spot after seeing him work with horses. The pay was $30 a month plus room and board, though Grayson arranged to take his meals in town so he could keep his room at Mrs. Shaw's boarding house. It meant less money in his pocket, but it also meant being in Colfax every day, being near the bakery every day, being near Olivia. He fell into a routine quickly. Up before dawn, into town for pie and coffee at Olivia's bakery, then out to the ranch for a full day's work. The job was demanding but satisfying, mostly involving breaking horses and mending fences, work he knew well. Then back to town in the evening, where he would often stop by the bakery again in the late afternoon, ostensibly to pick up bread or rolls for his supper, but really just to see her. Every day he bought something. Every day they talked a little more. Slowly, carefully, like a wild horse being gentled, she began to trust him. The guardedness in her eyes softened. She laughed at his stories, rare musical sounds that made his heart lift. She began to tell him things about herself. How she had learned to bake from her grandmother in Pennsylvania. How she had met Thomas at a church social and been swept up in his enthusiasm and dreams. How she had followed him west believing in a future that never quite materialized. "I do not regret it," she said one afternoon as she rolled out dough for the next day's pies. Grayson had stayed late and the shop was closed, but she had invited him to sit in the kitchen while she worked. "Thomas was a good man, just not a practical one. He loved me truly, and I loved him. But sometimes love is not enough to make dreams come true." "You made your dream come true," Grayson said, watching her capable hands work. "This bakery, what you have built here, that is real." "It is surviving," she corrected gently. "That is not quite the same as thriving. Give it time." "Word is spreading about your baking. I heard some folks talking at the ranch about making a special trip to town just for your cinnamon rolls." She smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. "I hope you are right. Winter will be here soon, and business always slows when the weather turns bad. If I can just make it through to spring." Grayson wanted to tell her not to worry, that he would make sure she had everything she needed, but he knew his place. They were friends, barely that even, despite the growing warmth between them. She was a respectable widow, and he was just a cowboy who bought pie every day. He had no right to presume anything more. But Lord, how he wanted more. October arrived with crisp mornings and the first hints of changing leaves in the cottonwoods along the creek. Grayson had been in Colfax for nearly 6 weeks, and in that time, he had not missed a single day at the bakery. It had become the rhythm of his life. The early morning visits, the warm greetings she always had ready, the way she remembered how he liked his coffee, the little extras she started adding to his orders without charge. The town had begun to notice, of course. In a place as small as Colfax, nothing went unremarked. Mrs. Shaw made knowing comments about his daily routine. Other customers at the bakery gave him appraising looks. But Olivia seemed oblivious to the speculation, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore it. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning when Grayson arrived to find the bakery dark and locked. His heart clenched with instant worry. In 6 weeks, she had never failed to open on time. He knocked on the door, softly at first, then more urgently. After what felt like an eternity, he heard movement inside. The door opened a crack and Olivia peered out. Her face was pale and he could see she had been crying. "Olivia, what is wrong?" he asked immediately. She shook her head, trying to compose herself. "I am sorry. I should have put up a notice. The bakery is closed today. Are you ill? Can I help?" "No, I just—" Her voice broke and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I received a letter yesterday. My sister in Philadelphia, she is very sick and they do not think she will recover. She is asking for me." Grayson's heart went out to her. "Then you must go to her." "I cannot," Olivia said, anguish in her voice. "The train fare is more than I can spare, and even if I could afford it, I cannot close the bakery for the weeks it would take to travel there and back. I would lose what few regular customers I have. I would lose everything." Without thinking, Grayson reached out and gently took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond accidental brushes of fingers, and he felt her tremble. "How much is the fare?" "No," she said immediately, understanding his intention. "No, I cannot accept money from you. That would not be proper." "Propriety does not matter when family is dying," he said firmly. "How much, Grayson, please?" "Olivia, I have been saving my wages. I have more than enough for my needs." "Let me do this, please." She looked up at him, tears streaming freely now. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" "Because I love you," he thought. "Because you have become the reason I wake up in the morning, the reason I am finally thinking about a future instead of just drifting. Because the thought of you hurting tears me apart inside." But he could not say those things. Not yet. Not when she was vulnerable and grieving. So instead he said simply, "Because you are my friend and friends help each other." She searched his face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "As a loan, I will pay you back every penny." "Whatever you need it to be," he agreed. By that afternoon they had made the arrangements. The train left from Las Vegas about 50 miles north the next morning. Grayson used almost all his saved wages to purchase her ticket and gave her extra for expenses. He also arranged with Mrs. Shaw to check on the bakery building while Olivia was away, and enlisted 2 of the ranch hands to help him board up the windows to protect against vandalism or weather. That evening, as they prepared the bakery for her absence, Olivia's composure finally cracked. She sank into one of the chairs by the window and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Grayson knelt beside her, hesitant but unable to keep his distance when she was in such pain. "It will be all right," he said softly. "You do not know that," she choked out. "My sister might die before I even get there. And what if the bakery fails while I am gone? What if I come back to nothing? This is all I have, Grayson. This building, this business, it is all I have in the world." "No," he said, reaching up to gently turn her face toward his. "You have more than this. You have strength and skill and courage. You have people who care about you. You have—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What?" she whispered, her green eyes searching his. "You have me," he said finally. "For whatever that is worth, I will be here when you come back. I will make sure everything is waiting for you. I promise." She looked at him for a long moment, then did something that took his breath away. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her carefully, as if she were something precious and fragile, one hand coming up to stroke her hair. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for everything." They stayed like that until her tears subsided, and Grayson knew with absolute certainty that he would do anything, give anything, to protect this woman and her happiness. The next morning, he drove her to Las Vegas in a borrowed wagon, the pre-dawn darkness gradually giving way to pink and gold light across the eastern plains. They did not speak much during the journey, but the silence was comfortable, and more than once he felt her glance at him. At the train station, as the locomotive hissed and steamed in preparation for departure, Olivia turned to him. She had composed herself again, putting on the brave face he had seen her wear so often, but he could see the fear and sadness beneath it. "I do not know how long I will be gone," she said. "It could be weeks or even longer if—" She could not finish the thought. "Take whatever time you need," Grayson said. "Do not worry about anything here, just be with your sister." She nodded, then reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. "I made these for you last night, molasses cookies. They will keep for a while, and I thought—" She smiled shakily. "I thought you might miss your daily pie." He took the bundle, touched beyond words. "I will miss more than the pie." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and promising and terrifying all at once. Then the conductor called for boarding, and the moment was broken. "I should go," she said. "Write to me," Grayson said impulsively. Let me know how you are. I will be checking for letters at the post office." "I will," she promised. Then, rising on her toes, she kissed him quickly on the cheek. Before he could react, she had gathered her bag and hurried toward the train. He stood on the platform until the train disappeared from sight, his hand touching the spot where her lips had brushed his skin. The days that followed were the longest of Grayson's life. He threw himself into ranch work, taking extra shifts and volunteering for the hardest jobs just to keep his mind occupied. But every morning he still rode into town, stopping by the dark bakery as if hoping to find it miraculously open. He checked the building's security, made sure no damage had been done, and imagined Olivia inside, surrounded by the sweet smells of her trade. True to her word, she wrote. The first letter arrived 8 days after she left, and Grayson read it so many times he nearly wore through the paper. Her sister was holding on, she wrote, though she was very weak. The doctors did not offer much hope, but Olivia was grateful to be there, to hold her sister's hand and share memories of their childhood. She thanked him again for making the journey possible and said she thought of Colfax often. She thought of him often, though she did not quite say that in so many words. But he could read between the lines. He wrote back, telling her about the ranch, about the town gossip Mrs. Shaw shared at supper, about how he checked on the bakery every day. He tried to keep his tone light, not wanting to burden her with his loneliness, but he suspected she could read between his lines too. More letters came, a correspondence that felt more intimate than their daily conversations ever had. In writing, both of them seemed braver, more willing to share thoughts and feelings they might have held back in person. She wrote about her marriage to Thomas, about the guilt she sometimes felt for being young and alive when he was gone, about her fears for the future. He wrote about his childhood, passed between relatives who had not really wanted him, about the rootless years that followed, about how Colfax had started to feel like home in a way nowhere else ever had. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, snow blanketed the town, and the work at the ranch slowed to winter chores. Grayson spent his days feeding livestock and mending equipment, and his evenings in his room at Mrs. Shaw's, reading and rereading Olivia's letters by lamplight. Her sister died on December 3rd. The letter informing him arrived a week later, and his heart broke for Olivia's pain. She would be staying through Christmas, she wrote, to help settle her sister's affairs and to spend time with her brother-in-law and young niece. But she planned to return to Colfax in January, if the weather permitted travel. Grayson counted the days. He also began planning. If Olivia was determined to make the bakery succeed, then he would help her however he could. He spoke to everyone he knew, spreading word that the bakery would reopen in the new year. He convinced Mrs. Shaw to place a regular order for bread and rolls. He even persuaded the ranch foreman to consider purchasing bulk baked goods for the crew rather than relying on the cook's notoriously poor biscuits. Christmas passed quietly. Grayson spent the day working at the ranch, grateful for the distraction. But in the evening, alone in his room, he allowed himself to think about the following Christmas, and whether he might spend it differently. Whether he might spend it with Olivia in a home they shared, building something together. It was a presumptuous dream, he knew. They had never even properly courted. He had no right to think about a future with her. But he could not help himself. She had become tangled up in every plan he made, every hope he held. The letter he had been waiting for arrived on January 10th. She would be returning on the 20th, arriving in Las Vegas on the afternoon train. Could he possibly meet her? He wrote back immediately, confirming he would be there, that he would not miss it for anything in the world. The 20th of January dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow glittering under a bright sun. Grayson took the day off from the ranch, borrowed the wagon again, and made the journey north with a heart that beat faster with every mile. The train was only slightly delayed, pulling into the station just after 3 in the afternoon. Grayson stood on the platform, hat in hand despite the cold, and watched passengers disembark. Then he saw her, and his breath caught just as it had that first morning months ago. She looked thinner, he thought, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of grief and sleepless nights. But when she spotted him, her whole face transformed with a smile so radiant it warmed him more than any fire could. "Grayson," she said, his name a prayer on her lips. He strode forward and took her bag, wanting desperately to embrace her but mindful of propriety and the watching eyes around them. "Welcome home," he said softly. "Home," she repeated as if testing the word. "Yes, that is exactly what it feels like." On the long ride back to Colfax, she told him about her sister's final days, about the peace that had come over her at the end, about the comfort Olivia had found in being there. She spoke of her niece, a sweet girl of 7 who had clung to Olivia as another link to her lost mother. She mentioned that her brother-in-law had begged her to stay, offering her a place in his household, security and family and ease. "But you came back," Grayson said, his hands tight on the reins. "I came back," she confirmed, "because my life is here now, my business, my purpose, She paused, then continued quietly, "my reasons for staying." He wanted to ask what those reasons were, wanted to hear her say what he hoped she might be feeling, but it was not the right time, not yet. So instead he told her about his preparations for the bakery's reopening, about the orders he had lined up, about how the whole town seemed eager for her return. "You did all that for me?" she asked, wonder in her voice. "I wanted to help," he said simply. "I wanted you to know that you were missed, that you matter here." "That I matter to you," she said, and it was not quite a question. He turned to look at her fully, the wagon momentarily forgotten. "Yes," he said, "you matter to me, Olivia, more than I know how to say." She held his gaze, color rising in her cheeks despite the cold. "You matter to me too. These months apart, your letters they were," she smiled. "They were everything." Something passed between them then, an acknowledgement of feelings too deep to be casual, too important to be rushed. By unspoken agreement, they let the moment rest, knowing there would be time soon to explore what was growing between them. The bakery reopened 3 days later, and the response exceeded even Grayson's optimistic predictions. Word had spread during Olivia's absence about the quality of her goods, and people came from neighboring ranches and even from Las Vegas to purchase her breads and pies and pastries. Within a week, she was busier than she had ever been, working long hours to keep up with demand. Grayson helped however he could. He arrived before dawn to start the ovens and carry heavy flour sacks. He stayed after closing to help clean and prepare for the next day. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the bakery and became about simply being near her, working beside her, building something together. One evening in early February, as they cleaned up after a particularly busy day, Olivia turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Grayson, may I ask you something?" "Anything," he said, setting aside the broom he had been using. "Why are you still here? You are a good cowboy, skilled and hardworking. You could find employment anywhere, probably for better wages. Yet you stay in Colfax, working at a small ranch for modest pay, and you spend all your free time helping in my bakery." She paused, then added softly, "Why?" He could have dissembled, could have made light of it, but they had been honest in their letters, and they deserved honesty now. He crossed to where she stood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "You know why," he said quietly. "You have known for months now, I think." "I want to hear you say it," she whispered. "Because I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with everything he felt. Because from the first moment I saw you through that window, I have been lost. Because you are everything good and strong and beautiful in this world, and being near you makes me want to be better than I am. Because the thought of riding away from here, away from you, is unbearable. Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. I love you too, she said. I think I started loving you the day you gave me money for the train ticket without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. And I knew I loved you when I was in Philadelphia and realized that all I wanted was to come back here, to you, to this life we were building. Olivia, he breathed, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. Can I court you properly? Can I call on you with the intention of marriage? Yes, she said, laughing and crying at once. Yes, please. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held all the tenderness and longing of their months of restrained friendship. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them and the perfect rightness of being together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. I do not have much to offer you, he said. Just my wages and my devotion and a future we would build together from nothing. That is everything, she said firmly. That is more than enough. Their courtship, official now, became the talk of Colfax. Grayson called on Olivia every evening after work, sitting in the bakery's kitchen while she prepared for the next day, talking about everything and nothing. On Sundays, her day of rest, they attended church together and took walks along the creek, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Shaw or one of the other town matrons. It was not always easy. There were people who thought Olivia should observe a longer period of mourning for Thomas, though he had been dead more than 2 years. There were those who whispered that Grayson was taking advantage of a vulnerable widow. But Olivia faced down the gossip with quiet dignity, and Grayson proved his devotion through consistent, honorable behavior. Spring arrived, transforming the harsh landscape with wildflowers and new grass. The bakery continued to thrive, and with Olivia's blessing, Grayson began taking a more active role in the business. He handled deliveries to the ranches and negotiated contracts for regular orders. His knowledge of the cattle business proved valuable in understanding the needs and schedules of their biggest customers. On a warm evening in May, 6 months after Olivia's return from Philadelphia, Grayson asked her to take a walk with him. They strolled to a spot by the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the sound of running water created a peaceful backdrop. Olivia, he began, then stopped, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. She smiled up at him, patient and loving. Yes. He took both her hands in his. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me purpose and home and love beyond anything I thought possible. I know I do not have much to offer in terms of wealth or position, but I can promise you this. I will work hard every day to provide for you and to make you happy. I will honor you and cherish you and stand beside you through whatever comes. And I will love you with everything I am for as long as I live. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. It was not fancy, just a plain ring he had spent 2 months' wages to purchase from a jeweler in Las Vegas, but he had chosen it carefully. Will you marry me? He asked. Will you be my wife? Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was pure joy. Yes, she said. Yes, Grayson, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner, and I will love you all my days. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and relief and happiness flooding through him. She kissed him back with equal fervor, and when they finally drew apart, both were laughing. When? She asked breathlessly. Whenever you want, he said. "Tomorrow, if you wish," she laughed again. "Let us give the town time to prepare. A month, perhaps. June would be lovely." "June is perfect," he agreed. "Everything about this is perfect." They married on the 20th of June, 1877, almost exactly 1 year after Grayson had first walked into the bakery. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with most of Colfax in attendance. Mrs. Shaw cried throughout, and even the gruff ranch foreman Dalton had to clear his throat suspiciously during the vows. Olivia wore a dress of soft blue that brought out her eyes, with wildflowers woven into her auburn hair. Grayson wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed until they looked almost new. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Grayson kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause. The celebration afterwards was held in the bakery, which Olivia had filled with every delicacy she could create. The whole town came to wish them well, to eat pie and cake, and to dance to music provided by a fiddle player and a man with a battered guitar. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, Grayson and Olivia stood together in the doorway of the bakery, watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape in shades of orange and pink and gold. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she said, leaning into him. "Thank you for seeing me that first morning, for staying, for giving me a reason to believe in the future again." "Thank you for teaching me what home means," he replied. "For showing me that putting down roots is not a trap, but a gift." They had decided to live above the bakery, in the small apartment that Olivia had occupied alone for so long. Grayson had spent weeks fixing it up, making repairs and improvements, transforming it from a widow's lonely space into a home for two. As they climbed the stairs that night, husband and wife, he carried her over the threshold and into their new life together. The months that followed were a period of joy and adjustment. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of married life. Olivia taught Grayson the finer points of baking, and while he never achieved her level of skill, he became proficient enough to help with the simpler tasks. He taught her about horses and cattle, knowledge that proved useful when they began discussing expansion of the business to include regular deliveries to more distant ranches. By autumn, the bakery was more successful than it had ever been. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the baking during busy periods, which freed up some of Olivia's time. Grayson left his ranch job and devoted himself full-time to the bakery business, managing deliveries and customer relations while Olivia focused on the actual baking. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. More than that, they were in love, deeply and genuinely, in a way that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day rather than fading into comfortable routine. One cold November evening, as they sat by the fire in their small parlor, Olivia reached for Grayson's hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is something I need to tell you," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. Understanding dawned on him and his breath caught. "Olivia, are you?" "I am with child," she confirmed, smiling through happy tears. "We are going to have a baby." Grayson felt tears sting his own eyes as he pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she must have been able to see the answer on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a child, a family of my own." They held each other for a long time, talking about the future, about names and hopes and dreams. The baby would be born in late June or early July, Olivia calculated, right around their first wedding anniversary. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Olivia continued working in the bakery through the winter and spring. though Grayson and Sarah insisted she take on lighter duties as her belly swelled. Grayson had never been so protective or so anxious, constantly worrying about her health and safety. "I am not made of glass," Olivia laughed one April morning when he tried to prevent her from carrying a bag of flour. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know," he said, kissing her forehead, "but you are my whole world and I cannot help worrying." Their son was born on the 4th of July, 1878, arriving with the dawn and announcing his presence with a healthy, lusty cry. Dr. Martin, who had attended the birth, pronounced both mother and baby in excellent health, then left the new family alone. Grayson held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would likely turn the same green as his mother's. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked from the bed, tired but radiant. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Grayson knew. "Thomas," he said softly. "After your first husband, if that would be all right with you. He brought you west and that eventually led you to me. Our son would not exist without him." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Thomas Grayson Cooper." "Tommy," Grayson said, the nickname feeling right. "Welcome to the world, Tommy." The first year of Tommy's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Olivia reduced her hours in the bakery, but continued to create her beloved pies and breads, while Sarah took on more responsibilities. Grayson found himself dividing his time between deliveries, caring for his son, and the countless other tasks that came with running a business and a household. There were hard times too. Money was sometimes tight, and there were weeks when they worried about making ends meet. Tommy had colic for the first 3 months, leading to sleepless nights and frayed nerves. One difficult winter, a flu outbreak swept through Colfax, and they both lived in terror that Tommy might fall ill, though he mercifully remained healthy. But through it all, their love sustained them. On the hardest days, when Grayson came home exhausted from deliveries, to find Olivia equally worn out from baking and caring for a fussy baby, they would still find moments to hold each other and remember why everything was worthwhile. They were building something real and lasting, a family and a life that belonged to them. Tommy's first birthday arrived with much celebration. The bakery had become such a fixture in Colfax that the whole town felt invested in the Cooper family's success. Mrs. Shaw made a special visit with a hand-knitted blanket. The ranch foreman Dalton, who had become something of a friend, carved a wooden horse for the boy. Even people from neighboring towns sent gifts and well wishes. As Grayson watched his son take his first wobbly steps while Olivia laughed and encouraged him, he marveled at how different his life had become. 3 years ago, he had been a drifter, moving from job to job with no ties and no future. Now he had everything: a wife he adored, a son he would die for, a business that brought satisfaction and purpose, and a community that felt like home. That evening, after Tommy was asleep in his cradle and the house was quiet, Grayson and Olivia sat together on their small porch, watching the stars come out over the New Mexico landscape. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked quietly. "Giving up the freedom of the trail for this life?" Grayson pulled her closer, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment. That was not freedom, Olivia. It was just running from the fear of settling down and possibly failing or being hurt. This is freedom, choosing to build something, to commit to someone, to plant roots and watch them grow. You taught me that." "We taught each other," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I had forgotten how to hope until you came along. You reminded me that endings can become new beginnings." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Olivia spoke again. "I am pregnant again." Grayson turned to her in surprise and delight. "Again?" Already she laughed at his expression. "Yes, again. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should arrive in February or March." He kissed her tenderly, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Another blessing," he murmured. "How did I get so lucky?" "We are both lucky," she corrected. "Lucky that you decided to buy pie every day just to see me." "Best decision I ever made," he said with a grin. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, arrived in early March during a late winter snowstorm. She was smaller than Tommy had been, but just as healthy, with auburn hair like her mother's and a disposition that seemed calmer than her brother's had been. Tommy, now almost 2, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to constantly touch her soft hair and tiny hands. Grayson watched his children together and felt such overwhelming love it was almost painful. Life continued its steady rhythm through the seasons. The bakery thrived, becoming known throughout the region. They eventually expanded into the neighboring storefront, creating more space for production. Sarah proved so valuable that they made her a partial partner in the business, an arrangement that benefited everyone. Grayson found himself becoming a pillar of the community in ways he never would have imagined. He was elected to the town council, helped organize community events, and became someone people turned to for advice and assistance. The rootless cowboy had become a respected businessman and family man. When Tommy was 5 and Grace was 3, Olivia discovered she was pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her exhausted and unwell for much of the duration. Grayson took over even more of the childcare and household duties while continuing to manage the delivery side of the bakery. Their third child, another son they named Matthew, arrived in November 1883. The birth was difficult, and Dr. Martin told them afterwards that Olivia should not have more children, as another pregnancy might endanger her health. It was sobering news, but they accepted it with grace, grateful for the 3 healthy children they had. Matthew proved to be a perfect blend of his siblings, with his mother's coloring and his father's temperament. Tommy immediately took on the role of protective older brother, while Grace seemed delighted to no longer be the baby. The years passed in a blur of children growing, business expanding, and love deepening. Tommy showed an early aptitude for numbers and began helping with the bakery's accounts when he was just 8 years old. Grace inherited her mother's talent for baking and could produce a perfect pie crust by the time she was 10. Matthew, the youngest, had his father's way with horses and people, charming everyone he met. By 1890, Grayson was 42 and Olivia 37. Their children were 12, 10, and 7, respectively, and the bakery had become the most successful business in Colfax. They had expanded twice more and now employed 6 people in addition to Sarah, who had become like family over the years. One spring evening, Grayson and Olivia took a rare moment alone, walking the same path by the creek where he had proposed so many years earlier. The cottonwood trees were bigger now, providing more shade, and the town had grown up around them, but the essential piece of the place remained. "Do you remember the first time I walked into your bakery?" Grayson asked, holding Olivia's hand as they walked. "Of course," she said, smiling at the memory. "You were so dusty from the trail and you had the saddest eyes I had ever seen, but there was kindness in them too. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," he said. "And when I tasted that apple pie, I knew I had to find a reason to stay." "So you bought pie every single day," Olivia laughed. "The whole town was talking about it within a week." "I did not care." I would have bought 100 pies a day if it meant I could see you." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Olivia, we have been married almost 13 years now, and I love you more today than I did the day I proposed, more than the day we wed. You have given me everything: love, family, purpose, home. I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Oh, Grayson, you saved me, you know. When you walked into my bakery that morning, I was just surviving, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You made me believe in happiness and second chances." They kissed in the fading light, husband and wife, partners and best friends, still as in love as they had been at the beginning. As they walked back toward town, toward their home and their children and the life they had built together, Olivia spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder how things might have been different if you had ridden through Colfax that day without stopping?" "Never," Grayson said firmly. "Because I believe some things are meant to be. You were meant to come west, to open that bakery, to be in that exact place at that exact time. And I was meant to see you through that window and fall in love. Everything that came after, all the joy and the challenges and the beautiful ordinary moments, all of it was meant to be ours." "I believe that too," Olivia said softly. "I believe we found each other exactly when we were supposed to." The years continued to unfold. Tommy eventually took over the business side of the bakery entirely, showing a shrewd business mind that expanded their reach even further. Grace became the head baker, developing new recipes that attracted customers from across the territory. Matthew, true to his nature, spent less time in the bakery and more time working with horses, eventually starting a stable business that complemented the family's other enterprises. All three children married well and happily, giving Grayson and Olivia grandchildren who filled their later years with joy. Tommy married a teacher named Elizabeth and had 4 children. Grace married a carpenter named Robert who built beautiful furniture, and they had 3 children. Matthew married a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they had 2 children who seemed destined to follow in their father's footsteps with horses. By the turn of the century, Grayson and Olivia were in their 50s, still active in the business but gradually letting their children take on more responsibility. They had become fixtures in Colfax, beloved by the community, their story of the cowboy who bought pie every day just to see the widow having passed into local legend. On their 25th wedding anniversary in June 1902, the town threw them a celebration. It seemed like everyone in Colfax, and half the surrounding territory, came to pay their respects and share in the joy of a marriage that had become an inspiration to so many. Standing in the same bakery where they had met all those years ago, now surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, Grayson raised a glass for a toast. "25 years ago," he said, his voice carrying through the crowded room, "I walked into this bakery looking for breakfast and found everything I had ever needed. The beautiful woman who became my wife, the family we built together, the community that embraced us, all of it started here. Olivia, my love, thank you for every moment, every challenge overcome, every joy shared. Here is to 25 more years." "Here is to 25 more," Olivia echoed, her eyes shining with love and happiness. They did not get 25 more years, but they got something just as precious. Grayson and Olivia spent their final decades in contentment, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing their business and community thrive, and treasuring each day together. They took walks by the creek, sat on their porch in the evenings, and never stopped finding joy in each other's presence. Grayson passed away peacefully in 1918 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family. Olivia held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him and would see him again someday. She followed him 3 years later in 1921, and the whole town mourned the loss of a woman who had been a cornerstone of their community for over 4 decades. They were buried side by side in the Colfax cemetery, under cottonwood trees not unlike the ones by the creek where Grayson had proposed. Their gravestone bore a simple inscription chosen by their children: "Together in love, forever in peace." The bakery continued for another generation, run by Grace and her children, before eventually closing in the 1940s. But the building remained, a landmark in Colfax, and people still told the story of the cowboy who bought pie every day just to see the widow, and how their love had built something that lasted. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of courage and commitment, of a love that transformed two lonely people into a family and a legacy. It was a story that proved the best things in life often come when we least expect them, when we are brave enough to stay instead of drifting on, when we choose to invest in people and places and futures instead of protecting ourselves from possible pain. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the American West, reminding generations to come that true love really can conquer all. That home is not a place but a person, and that sometimes the best decision you can make is to walk through a door and order a slice of pie.